Welcome and thank you for joining us today on our workshop that we have. This will be the second in the series of workshops that we are doing on Databricks. I'm going to share my screen and someone let me know in the chat or pipe in audio and let me know if you don't see my screen. So welcome again. Today is Modern Infrastructure and Security on Databricks. We at Blueprint, we are a consulting company. We focus a lot on Databricks, but what we really specialize in is modern data estates, which means getting all of your data into one place so that we can apply data science and analytics to it and get you some actionable insights. We serve customers in retail, government, oil and gas, and manufacturing, to name a few. Also, more recently in FinOps and financial services. And today I have the great pleasure to introduce to you our two leaders in our workshop. The workshop is going to show you live demonstrations of setup and then Q&A. We have joining us today Brian Klepper and John Urban. Brian is a cloud engineer with Blueprint and John is a solutions architect. And then we gave you some links here for our GitHub repository, which you may be interested in, and then a couple links to some workshops, additional workshops on Databricks, and also some Velocity Tour events, which are industry conferences and trade shows that we are attending. I will put these links in the chat as well. And with that, I will hand it over to Brian and John. Brian, you want to take over?
Sure thing. Thanks for the introduction. Let me go ahead and share my screen. All right. So hello, everybody, and welcome to Blueprint's workshop on modern infrastructure for security for Databricks. My name is Brian, and co-presenting with me today will be John. Like was mentioned earlier, this is the first in a series of workshops happening the first Wednesday of every month, where we'll be demonstrating best practices for configuring a cloud environment for Databricks Lakehouse platform. First thing I want to note is there is a public repository on GitHub available with all of the Terraform configuration we'll highlight today, as well as additional resources to get you started. In my first demonstration, I'm going to cover creating a new Databricks workspace in Azure using Terraform, along with an external storage account, Key Vault, and a managed identity called an access connector for Databricks for the workspace to enable secure and maintainable data access policies. After that, I'll demonstrate creating a Metastore and its storage account. And then finally, I'll show off some examples of workspace administration configurations, such as assigning users to workspace group, cluster creation, creating a Key Vault back secret scope, and an external data location along with its accompanying storage credentials. By no means will this be an exhaustive demonstration of all the Databricks configuration management you can achieve using Terraform or other infrastructure as code tools. But my goal with this first talk is to show you some of the power of using infrastructure as code tooling to manage Databricks and get you excited to dive deeper on your own. After my part's finished, I'll throw it over to John for the roadmap on how to get your data moving. With that being said, let's go ahead and start kicking off provisioning resources. I'm going to go ahead and start this. As you can see, I'm running this in Visual Studio Code. I've used PowerShell as my orchestration scripting language of choice. The first thing we want to do is authenticate with our Azure AD tenant using the Azure CLI and make sure that our subscription is set. And I went ahead and I ran up to and including applying our first configuration where we'll be creating our Databricks workspace, the Key Vault, the storage account, and the access connector. Let's give Terraform a little time to initialize the backend, download any provider binaries it needs to. And then I'm going to kick off applying the first set of configurations. And while that's running, I'll kind of talk about what Terraform init does, what Terraform apply does, and then highlight some of the cool things that you get for free while using infrastructure as code to manage Databricks and sharing best practices in code. So the first thing is, since we have no resources created, Terraform creates a plan based on the configuration that we've written to create our resources that we've declared in our configuration. All right, and let's go back to the script here while apply is running. Let me talk about Terraform init. When you call Terraform init for the first time, it provisions a working directory where Terraform will download required binaries for any declared providers. You can just think of providers as API implementations that enable Terraform to create the live resources you declare in its configuration. It also searches for any module declarations and creates some metadata and verified source pathing for those modules. Modules are just bits of reusable Terraform configuration. You can think of them like a function in Python. And another thing that it does is it sets up any back-end state file storage. The state file for Terraform is a way that Terraform manages which resources you've already created and compares to your configuration, and it'll create a plan for your deployment. In this case, since none of these resources have been created before, we're going to add all of them live. We're not going to change any of them, and we're not going to destroy anything. And another thing I want to highlight that you get for free when you write your infrastructure in code is that you can codify best practices, such as creating an access connector for Databricks to manage data access policies. This is, from guidance with Microsoft on the best way to manage data access with Databricks workspaces is to create an access connector instead of creating something like an app registration and service principal, because now you're managing client secrets. You have to make sure that they're not expired. You have to rotate them. And so a best practice is to instead create a access connector and let Azure AD manage all of that for you. As we wait for our key vault to create, go ahead and talk about the next step we have here, which is with Terraform, you can declare dynamic outputs for resource properties you wouldn't know ahead of time, such as your Databricks workspace URL, your access connector ID, an external storage URL, your key vault URI, all that fun stuff. You can declare in a output declaration, specify a value, and from your root configuration, you can now access any of those values that you need for later deployments. Cool, everything's done. We'll go ahead and gather up our required outputs using the Terraform output command, and I'm going to run to where I'm creating an access token. A call out here is that Blueprint's Azure AD instance already has skim provisioning enabled, so I'm able to create an Azure AD access token and authenticate with my Databricks workspace using this access token. While we can't demo setting up skim provisioning on this demonstration, I have provided a couple links in the repository to get you started setting that up yourself. And it is a best practice, as you will not need to recreate users or groups within Databricks workspaces once you've set up skim provisioning. It'll pull in all of your Azure AD users, and if you configure it to, it'll also pull in groups. So that's very helpful for managing workspace access. And now we're setting up our Databricks Metastore and its storage account. Again, I'm calling Terraform init on our new root configuration. I've separated out all of the workspace configuration from the Metastore configuration because given the fact that a Metastore has a one-to-many relationship with workspaces in your Azure region, you'll typically have those on different life cycles. So you can imagine with Terraform, if you wanted to delete a workspace, you would run Terraform destroy, and it would just tear down your workspace. And if you're managing your Metastore in the same configuration, you'd also delete your Metastore, but you might have other workspaces attached to it. So that's a bad idea. So we went ahead and separated that out using a different root directory for our Metastore. We're going to go ahead and let this storage account create. It's creating our Metastore. It's also assigning the workspace to our Metastore. I'm going to go ahead and open up the module for our Metastore creation. Oh, all right, cool. Let me show it off real quick. We run up to here. All right, so you have declared resource for the Databricks Metastore, the storage root. You have variable for who owns this. And then we're gonna run apply for the last set of configuration, which is the workspace administration. We'll go ahead and see if that works. Let me just run this actually via the command line first, because I've had issues in our test run with some permissions not yet being propagated in Azure, and one of the configurations for the external storage location has actually failed on me before. So I'm gonna go ahead and just run this via the CLI first, and then I can retry it if it fails, because I've noticed it's a transient error. When I go back to the Metastore here. Yeah, let's go ahead and apply our last bit of configuration. So you see, like within Terraform in your configuration, you can declare resources, and you have repeatable self-documenting best practices. You can also, I mean, you imagine you can code review this too before you run Terraform apply. Another thing I'd like to call out is I've commented out the Terraform plan command, just because when you're running Terraform via CLI, you kind of get the plan output for free, as you've seen here, right? So running plan and then apply via the CLI is just kind of duplicating your effort. But you can imagine, right, if you have a CI/CD pipeline, you can attach the plan output to a code review, and then once you approve it, you can run Terraform apply with an auto approve flag, and you can deploy your infrastructure that way. So right now we're creating all of the workspace administration examples. So let's go ahead and take a look at what we're creating here. First, we have a few data source declarations. You can think of these more as telling Terraform, hey, there's a resource that already exists. I want you to look that up for me and give me all of the information and properties about that. For example, here we're looking up the Databricks workspace group admin, and then we're using it later to assign my co-presenter John as a member of that group so that he can log in to the workspace and begin his presentation ideally seamlessly. We're also creating a storage credential and an external location. as as guidance for best practices when setting up a Databricks workspace data solutions. Let me see here. Yeah, so this cluster has taken 5 minutes in the past to run and set up and create. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about, kind of summarize what I've shown, and then I'll throw it over to John. So we've seen how you can leverage infrastructure as code tooling to bake in best practices to your Databricks environment creation. This includes leveraging an access connector for Databricks workspace data access, creating a regions metastore to enable Unity catalog for data governance, which Sean will show more of. And then, while we didn't demonstrate setting up SCIM provisioning to federate your Azure AD identity provider with Databricks, we did provide some links to get you started setting that up. A call out is that it will require Azure Active Directory Global Administrator to set that up. So your mileage may vary on if you're able to do that out of the box, or if you got to cozy up to your IT administrator to get that done for you. I guess while this cluster spins up, if there's any questions, feel free to ask those now. See, here we go. So it can't create the external location because the contributor role in the storage account is not set. So this is, kind of the result of doing a live demonstration is that sometimes when you run through these things, you have to wait for permissions to propagate. So the contributor role in the storage account is not set. As you can see in the workspace configuration, we have actually set that up for our access connector principal. And so unfortunately, there's not a ton to do here except to retry this, which is why I've just ran this command via the CLI. And it again might fail, but that's also kind of the power of Terraform Apply, is that you can run this again. It has updated the state, and it will give you a different plan than the first time, where we're going to try again to add the external storage location. And I think the ID of the user changes when you run this, but it has no effect on John's permissions. So we're going to have to run this again. You'll see that it'll fail again, but I promise you, the permissions will eventually propagate, and I'll be able to set up this external location for John. So with that, I'm going to throw it over to John, and he can pick up the ball and get rolling with showing the roadmap of how to get your data rolling.
All right, thank you, Brian. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining our workshop today. Today, I am going to be covering the topics Metastore Unity Catalog, security around accessing your Databricks workspaces, protecting your data with Unity Catalog, federation of identities from your identity access provider, roles of the workspace catalog, and schema admins. Along the way, I'll be highlighting Databricks best practices, and we will provide links to these best practices. Last but not least, I'll do a quick demo of getting data from a source into a Delta table. Hopefully that storage account will come up there, and I will show some of the challenges you may encounter along the way. You will see how Databricks via Unity Catalog eases the burden of securing your data so that you can focus on getting your data moving. So what Brian did there is a great set of steps that accelerate getting up and running and getting your data moving. Let me share my screen here. Let me know if you can't see that. Okay, so what Brian has done, he's created a using Terraform, a workspace, and I have actually already logged in, but I'm going to log in again here so you can actually see that. And this is single sign-on. He talked a lot about that, and the federation of your identities using SCIM. One of the things I want to go through is basically I've come up with about 7 steps, give or take a few, that get you to the place where you can start messing and working with your data. And so that first step is what Brian just did. And there's 3 big things around that he had to get to before he could even run that infrastructure as code. That's cloud access, getting his security set up, and any identity provision things going, and the SCIM tool, and infrastructure as code. And the groups, creating groups and appropriate users are done by your security group. So those things all kind of have to be running in parallel while you're trying to get your workspace up and running. So I've done this recently, and the workspace creation, it's a lot of work, clicking around that user interface, getting the user set up and all this. What you just saw, if you see my screen here, I'm logged in as an admin, and I didn't do any configuration. The infrastructure as code did all that for us. So what Brian did puts us way down the road. So what I want to talk about today is Metastore Unity Catalog. So what is a Metastore in Databricks? And the official definition is a Metastore is a top-level container of objects in Unity Catalog, storing metadata about data assets, tables and views, and permissions that govern and access to them. You must create a Metastore in each region of that your organization operates in. So this is really all about getting access to your data and controlling that access to your data, creating tables. You could think of it like in SQL, as you have a database, a schema, and a table. This is all of that, and it gives you access and has a unified place for you to control all that. So if you have different environments, Unity Catalog spans across multiple workspaces, and it allows you to control it all in one place. So the Unity Catalog, the official definition of that is a unified governance solution for all data and AI assets, including files, tables, machine learning models, and dashboards in your lakehouse on any cloud. So the Metastore is just a storage account that stores all of these permissions and things. So you heard Brian talking through that a bit. The next thing I'd like to show is the administration screen. So this is kind of a talk about what did all that infrastructure as code give us. So right here, you can see that I'm a user, Brian's a user, and we actually belong to a group. And that group, it was federated down from our AD. So if I go over to, this is actually our Azure Databricks account. You have to be an account admin to access this. So this is kind of the highest level access on the Azure side on Databricks. So this group here is IAC Workshop Admin. Something really nice you can do here is under this, under the workspace, you can go in and you can assign a AD group or a group to people. So to a workspace, sorry. So you have your group here. I'm going to say, I'd like to say IAC Workshop admins are admins. I can save this, and that gives all of those people that are in that group access to that workspace. I'm not going to do this here because he already has this set up, but that's a quick way to grant people access without having to add each person. And I can't stress enough, SCIM is your friend. AD groups, manage that on your on-prem side and let SCIM do the heavy lifting. Never assign permissions to a user, assign permissions to a group. And that's Databricks best practices. So going back here to our workspace, you can see I have a group, but you don't see the group. You have to add the group in order to get that group into your workspace. And it's just simply clicking on this and adding it. And I'm doing this because when you first spin up the group, it's just kind of blank. It has nothing really in it. Had the 2 users that Brian added, but not the group. The groups don't propagate to the workspace unless you allow them. Gives you more control over it. Okay, so now that I have that, let's get into the data side a little bit. So under the data side, the data tab here, we're going to look at the data because ultimately that's what we're all about, trying to get this data flowing and moving. If I go to external data, you're going to see external locations. I have one, and this is the external location that Brian created. This is a storage account, and we're going to land some data in that storage account. And so right now, there's no grants other than Brian. Brian is the owner of that. And that's bad because what if Brian wants to take a vacation and we come in and we need to grant some privileges? Well, he's the owner of that, so he's the only one that can do that. We're going to change that in just a second. But first, I'm going to go over and I'm going to create a new shared notebook. And I'm going to import that because I can't remember all those things I need to type. I'm going to pull this workshop demo in here. And from here, I'm going to walk through. Yeah, let's try that. This is a cool user interface. This is basically we're going to be pulling. This is a simple, quick demo to show you all that Brian just did, infrastructure as code. I'm to this point already. I'm bringing up a notebook and I'm going to show you how to move data around. So let's connect to our cluster here. And we had a couple of issues with this in the beginning. Again, what Brian said, sometimes things are still provisioning, gaining access in the background, and you see some things, some errors pop up here and there. So hopefully we can show you the whole thing. So this full weather data from an endpoint, and I'm just basically putting it into Spark data frame and then showing it. That's this step right here. So the next thing I want to do is say, okay, now I want to create data. I want to create a Delta table. So you can see in my code here that I need to create a catalog, a schema, and a table. So if I go back to my data tab, and you can see there is no workshop demo 01. It's not there yet. It doesn't have that at all. So we're going to create that. So we're going to run this. And we had permission denied. So you see this error here, create manage store. I was just talking about this. If we go back to the data tab now, we're going to see that the owner of that table is Brian. And so Brian, Brian doesn't need to be the owner of that. We want the admin to be the owner of that. So Databricks best practices is you have catalog admins, schema admins controlling this. You get into things like you don't want just anyone going in there and creating and dropping tables in some of your higher environments. You may want to have your sandbox or your dev doing that. But for this, you want to have an AD group always assigned to every person. So we're going to go ahead and save that. And this is actually good enough to run my command, but I do want to show you that you can actually grant specific privileges to a group or a person, but we don't ever want to do a person. We're just going to do a group. You can do this create manage store if you wanted to, but I'm not going to do that for this demo because we have the owner is this access at workshop admin. So now I'm going to go back over and let's see, hopefully this will work now. See if this will work for us. I think that we got hung up on this in our practice session, but we'll see if it works this time. Yeah, see, this is the error, permission denied, request. This is related to the authorizations not propagating quite yet. So let me see if I can get that to run again. It may have created one or two of those. Let's check real quick. Sometimes you refresh that. Yeah. Yeah, so we're running into this. It just takes some time to get those permissions propagated. Oh, it did create. Oh, created it, just not the table yet. Table's not created yet. Let me try one more time. And if that doesn't work, we'll just keep moving on. Okay, that's not going to work. But what I do want to show is the next thing you do, you create that table, that catalog schema and table. And now that is ready to receive data. So the very next thing I would do is run this little bit of code that takes that data frame and pushes it right into my new table. So now I have all the good things of Delta table, Databricks Delta table ready to go. And I have some graphs I produce and things that you can show a lot of different things. This is a query on the table. You can see that the data got pulled, and now you can start working with your data. So this is basically how you get rolling. Let me try that one more time just to see if that's gonna work for us. It'd be fun to see it. It's probably not gonna behave. Let's see if it'll work. Oh, maybe it'll work this time. So let me look at my notes here. I talked about Metastore, Unity Catalog, some of the key features, and that went ahead and that worked. Let me talk about some key features of the Unity Catalog. Define once, secure everywhere, standard compliant security model, built-in auditing and lineage, data discovery. These are all things that make Unity Catalog just such a wonderful tool. And back over here to my demo, I'm going to show you the data. So now I refresh this, and you should see a table now. Not really a big deal, but there's my table, and I have no data in here right now. There's no data, but I'm going to go ahead and run this write of data from my data frame into the data table, the Delta table. And that's done. Now I'm going to run the SQL for that. So this is a SQL call, SQL persona here, and there's the data for that. And here is the just a Spark run of the data. And you can do nice, cool, fun things like this visualization. You can see that data. And this is the data profile, what happened. So that is getting your data flowing. Now, to me, as an app developer, it's incredible being able to get to that point so quick. All that configuration's taken care of for you. It's ready to roll. So I've discussed admin groups set up for Metastore, workspace, and account administration. Understanding the role of the Databricks Account admin console and workspace admin functions. We didn't talk much about the account admin. We did see a little bit about that, but mostly this is around the workspace admin and how they get around and move around to get those teams going, moving data. I have links to best practices. There is a lot of great articles out there. These all link to Databricks. There's the Unity Catalog best practices and how to set those up. Databricks Workspace Admin. This is the for account, workspace, and Metastore. This is a really good article on what the 3 different admins do and how you can assign those roles to people. This is another one on just getting that workspace going. So we had a client, and it's really challenging sometimes to figure out how you want to set up your workspace and the security around that. But great articles out here on best practices from Databricks on that. So in wrapping up here, infrastructure as code makes your life easy. With infrastructure as code, Unity Catalog, the SCIM, getting your data flowing and keeping it safe and secure has never been easier with Databricks. So that's the end of my talk. Anyone have any questions?
Thank you, John and Brian. I do have one question in the queue.
Sure.
That question is, can you speak to the relevance of the KV-backed secret scope?
John, is that something you want to handle? Because I mean, to me, it's about flexibility and shareability. If you have secrets you need to use across workspaces, you can set up secret scopes using a key vault, and it kind of externalizes the store for your secrets, so they're not in your tied to your Databricks workspace.
Yeah, that's correct. And there's two ways to do it. There's the Databricks secret store, and there's also like Brian said, you can use the vault to store your secrets in as well. So I don't know if that answers your question. Does that answer your question?
It does.
Okay, thanks.
Excellent.
Any other questions?
Yeah, hi. This is Brandon. I did want to talk about or have you address the ability to manage different environments via IAC and further state management and things like that. How do you keep from writing dev to prod and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, within your Terraform configuration, when you're running things like Terraform init, it'll read all those configuration files at that root directory. So kind of at planning time, you want to think about your directory structure and separate out resources dedicated to dev environment versus, UAT or prod environment. I showed, let me just quickly share my screen again. And this is also available on the repo. And I didn't highlight it just because we don't have like an example of like maybe furthering your configuration by setting up a separate environment, but there is a folder here called environment test, right? It's not implemented, but you can imagine you have another set of configuration files, like a folder like for your workspace administration. And again, the way that your Terraform state file is managed is at the root level for your working directory. So if you were to run Terraform init again in, say, this top level test folder, it'll create a new state file. And as long as your backend configuration is configured in a way that you don't stomp over your current state file, you'll have a new state file where all of those resources are managed separately via Terraform.
Hey, Brandon, your question piqued or made something come to mind, keeping your data separate, just like on the Unity catalog side. Let me show my screen again real quick. Share and grab that data explorer. This should be right. So in here, think of WS_demo1 as dev, and think of like maybe, I don't know if this is going to be a good example, but samples is not a good one. If I had another dev and maybe prod, well, if I click on prod, can I see prod data? Well, right now, the only people that can see this data under here is the owner, the AIC workspace admins. They're the only ones that can see it. Now, I can grant more privileges to people so they can see it. And I didn't go over this, that's why I'm wanting to make sure I show it. So if we have another set of like workshop users, let's say, for instance, let's give workshop users the access to select that data. They can see it. Then they modify it, insert data, delete data. We can find with fine-grained access control all the way up to the catalog level. So if you grant that access to the workspace group up here, then they have access to do all the tables underneath that. But if we're going very granular down low, we can protect the access of that. So that's another reason why it's a great tool to be able to control data access, keeping your data safe.
Yeah, and that's a good idea for continuing these demonstrations, right? Is maybe we build out a test environment, we show a separation of the data access and data from a dev environment, from a stage environment, right? And we can kind of
Yes.
build on this example to show more isolation in your configurations.
So I know this is a first iteration, and great job, by the way. But are those access control things something that could be configured via IAC, or is that something that's purely administrative after the fact?
No, you can definitely continue on the workspace administration route and have those spun up via infrastructure as code. Right. I can update the public repo with links to the Databricks provider from Terraform, and it'll have a bunch of examples of stuff just like that. Assigning users to groups, creating groups, etc.
So Brian and John, could you recap some of the benefits of Databricks and spinning up quickly? And then I have a second question is you referred to patterns previously. Could you speak to some of the benefits to clients from these patterns?
Sure, I could take the patterns. I know that we're at Blueprint, we're always finding ways to accelerate engagements and get people up and running quicker. So we've identified lots of different patterns. We actually, seeing a customer, how they have their data, if we're doing a lift and shift, how to move that data and get that schema for those tables in their current environment over into Databricks. We have some tools we can use to accelerate that and to make it faster. So there's a lot of things we see every day where we try to write special tools and things to help just get that thing moving quicker. So hopefully that answers that question. And I would just say to your first question that just the infrastructure as code is wonderful. If you had to do this every time, all the different steps you have to walk through to get things working. I mean, the fact that I was able to, from him running a command line and very, maybe 2 command lines to get the Metastore up. He could do that in 1 if he wanted to. And then for me to be able to log in, man, that's huge. So that's kind of my simplistic way of answering that question.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, just to add, I think it's very powerful to be able to codify best practices in an easy to read configuration, and then maybe share that out across your organization so that other people can spin something up quickly with best practices baked into the configuration. So there's no other way they could do it, right? In fact, like one of the first iterations of this, I was creating an app registration as a service principal. I updated my knowledge about best practices regarding data access. I removed the app registration service principal from the configuration. I ran Terraform apply, and it tore down all that access for me. I didn't have to click around in the UI. Everything is right there, readable in code, and it's also a way to document your environment so that people know what exists out there and how everything is connected, again, in human readable configuration files.
Great, thank you. If there are any other questions, feel free to go ahead and type those in, or you could come off mute and pose the question. I'll hold just a second. Otherwise, we can close the workshop and thank everyone. No more questions? All right. Well, thank you, Brian. And Brian, I realized I butchered your last name before. It's Kepler. I knew that. Sorry about that. And then John, thank you to you as well for your demo today. I think it was really helpful, and I invite any of the attendees to reach out to us if you want to have any further discussions or need any assistance getting started. And then I also had given you some of the links in the chat to the GitHub repo and links to our workshops, additional workshops that we do every week on Wednesdays at noon Pacific time, and then a few events that we'll be attending in person at industry conferences and trade shows. And you can feel free to try to reach us and meet up with us in those cities as well. Other than that, with no further questions, oh, I just saw someone raise their hand, but nope, I think they put it down. All right, then. Thanks again for joining us today. We really appreciate your time. And we'll close the workshop now. Thank you. Take care and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.